Hi friends, it's Wendy at the Acorn. I have a story for you today, and it's about two of my favorite characters, Frog and Toad. They like to hear stories told about them, so I'm going to invite them here to our story time. They're going to sit on my lap while I read you their story from a collection, The Frog and Toad Treasury. The name of this one story in here is A Lost Button. You know I love buttons. Toad and Frog went for a long walk. They walked across a large meadow. They walked in the woods. They walked along the river. At last, they went back home to Toad's house. "Oh, drat," said Toad. "Not only do my feet hurt, but I have lost one of the buttons on my jacket." "Don't worry," said Frog. "We will go back to all of the places where we walked. We will soon find your button." They walked back to the large meadow. They began to look for the button in the tall grass. "Here is your button," cried Frog. "That is not my button," said Toad. "That button is black. My button was white." Toad put the black button in his pocket. A sparrow flew down. "Excuse me," said the sparrow. "Did you lose a button?" "I found one." "That is not my button," said Toad. "That button has 2 holes. My button had 4 holes." Toad put the button with 2 holes in his pocket. They went back to the woods and looked on the dark paths. "Here is your button," said Frog. "That is not my button," cried Toad. "That button is small. My button was big." Toad put the small button in his pocket. A raccoon came out from behind a tree. "I heard you were looking for a button," he said. "Here's one that I just found." "That is not my button," wailed Toad. "That button is square. My button was round." Toad put the square button in his pocket. Frog and Toad went back to the river. They looked for the button in the mud. "Here is your button," said Frog. "That is not my button," shouted Toad. "That button is thin. My button was thick." Toad put the thin button in his pocket. He was very angry, and he jumped up and down and screamed, "The whole world is covered with buttons, and not one of them is mine." Toad ran home and slammed the door. There on the floor, he saw his white, 4-holed, big, round, thick button. "Oh," said Toad, "it was here all the time. What a lot of trouble I have made for Frog." Toad took all of the buttons out of his pocket. He took his sewing kit down from the shelf, and Toad sewed all of the buttons all over his jacket. The next day, Toad gave his jacket to Frog. Frog thought that it was beautiful. He put it on and jumped for joy. None of the buttons fell off. Toad had sewed them all on very well. So, Toad kind of threw a fit without needing to, huh? Sometimes that happens. But it was nice of him to make the jacket for his friend Frog with all the buttons on it. Do you ever look at buttons like I have my collection of buttons? Go see how many you can find and see if your buttons have 2 holes or 4 holes. That's all, friends. Say goodbye, Frog and Toad.